Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar held by Ksapa.org. It's as always kind of a monthly webinar, which is part of our advocacy activities at Ksapa. Today, we will focus on circular economy, and we'll make sure that for all of you, we start with just a few practicalities to make the most of this webinar together. So this is a webinar when you can, of course, change your name if you want. So when you ask questions, we know who you are. You're automatically muted. That's a way to maximize the quality of the discussion for everyone. We don't use videos in this webinar, just to kind of maximize also the kind of energy footprint of this discussion together, which will be uploaded and accessible for free on our website, Ksapa.org, on the publication section, together with all the webinars that are registered with a broad community of people sharing perspectives, advancing sustainability and the role of companies and investors to move faster on the broad sustainability agenda. You can, of course, feel free to share and invite colleagues or people you think can find that content valuable. And if you use the social media, please include at Ksapa.org so we can track and participants can all track those discussions and comments you may want to share with your followers. Last, we will make sure at the far end of this webinar to display a short poll. It's just 3 questions, and please take the time to respond as this is going to help us improve the quality of those discussions, as we really want to make sure that you really make the most of the time that you're spending with us. So just moving on to the core of the discussion. Today, we will be talking about circular economy, and we will focus on circular fibers and textile industry, and more precisely, interesting solutions, concrete solutions and initiatives shared by what we are doing at Ksapa, but most importantly, what our interveners will come and share from their own perspective to advance and accelerate sustainability and circularity. My name is Farid. I'm working for Ksapa.org. I've been working for more than 20 years on those issues of sustainability. Mostly when it comes to the conversation, there's a broad number of companies in the apparel, mills, sundry, and luxury segments. And clearly, my ambition, which is shared by everyone at Ksapa.org and our ecosystem, is that we really want to use the time of this webinar, learning from our own expertise, experience, what we know about what has been done to date, to really change the pace of circular economy and explore anything that can make it much more at the scale of what's needed to respond to the pressure that our planet is witnessing. So I'm really exploring that from that perspective. A brief introduction about what we are at Ksapa. So we are an organization which combines 3 activities to serve that agenda of accelerating transformation of investors and companies to better address the big sustainability issues by 2030. Our 4 priorities are to work on human rights, inclusive growth, climate change, and circular economy. And we serve those activities through 3 pillars. One is consulting. Typically on circular economy, we work and we frame strategic priorities with companies and industries, but also with investors. We lead stakeholder engagement activities and work on internal alignment, circular economy being a topic which requires to think very closely and carefully about how to align quality, production, cost, finance, multiple aspects. So we work on those aspects. At the core of our activities, we are an organization which combine digital, financial, sustainability, and other expertises to design programs enabling to change the scale of a circular economy and the other topics I was mentioning at the beginning. For example, we've invested in developing and deploying deploying solutions for traceability and large-scale technical training of workers and potentially smallholders that we can find in the fiber supply chain. And that's something that enabled to ensure that over time, the supply chain is at the level of the expectations from a circular economy perspective. We also structure a fund enabling a company to expand across operations and strategic suppliers, some circular economy programs, but we do, of course, the same on, for example, climate. And we're a .org organizations. If you browse our website, you will see that very quickly. And in that sense, we are leading by our activities with a purpose. We want to share, we're open source. And our job is clearly to inspire others and provide solutions. So in that sense, we advocate and we're pretty active in the space, and this webinar is part of those activities. It's all open source and all accessible together with briefing papers and other documents to hopefully help you all understand and move faster on those pressing topics such as circularity. We operate with a network which enables us to, typically when we work in the COVID environment, to conduct some assessment or review, for example, of suppliers and partners across the world without having to travel. We have a core network of people who can help in that sense across the globe, and partners who help to bring some complementary expertise we don't necessarily have in-house. Typically, when we structure some fund, we need to know very closely the local regulatory environments, which we do with local partners in that space anywhere. What can incentivize, for example, circularity in Malaysia is different from what you can find in Brazil. We know how to operate in that space and tailor those kind of programs. We also tap into some partners, for example, on playing a lot with data to activate some data science in the kind of program that we develop, and that's something that is coming from some of our strategic partners. We have been addressing the topic of circularity across a good number of activities and publications. I just want to name one that is important to us, our Towards 2030 report, which framed what the outcome of research that we published a year ago, and that's been really aligned with the implications of COVID, which has amplified a lot of the priority issues we identified ourselves through this report, which is accessible for free on our website on the publication section. It clearly defines 6 priorities for the decade, one of them being clearly circular economy. And that is coming at a moment when this webinar is held today, when I've been a part of some World Economic Forum conversation today and tomorrow, and where again, it is very clear that circular economy is part of what really needs to be to improve for the years to come. And it is set to create 700,000 jobs by 2014 and savings of up to $200 billion on an annual basis, which is very interesting at the time when the pandemic has shown that there is potentially for some cash shortage, needs to identify savings, and needs to redesign supply chain to better localize some strategic activities for sourcing components, for example, as much as address some of the expectations from consumers and regulators. So moving to the core of our conversation, in our assessment, circular economy can improve and change scale if 5, I would say, activities or levers are activated. There are two levers that I can briefly introduce, and 3 levers which we are going to explore much more in detail with our 3 interveners. 2 levers are coming from the consumer acceptance of solutions which are not circular by essence, or increasingly are asking for more circularity in what they are purchasing. That's one lever. So the way brands are able to adapt to that acceptability and customer demand. And the second lever is coming from the regulatory pressure that might increasingly force a couple of business models to change and adapt. But there are three additional levers which we are going to explore much more in details. One is the capacity to build alignment. If you want to develop some circular economy, you need to make sure that across a chain or in a community, people speak the same language, basically. That is something that we are going to explore, notably with the development of guidelines. It's a good and a very strategic initiative enabling people to share the same understanding of what is expected for circularity to change scale. Another aspect is funding. What's been frustrating to me in my experience on circularity has been too much pilots and not enough activities at scale. And that connects very quickly to the question of how you fund or get the right resources to ensure that a circular economy or circularity solutions can change scale. So funding is clearly another lever. And another one that is extremely important, of course, is to organize a kind of marketplace or market ecosystem, which we are going to explore also in conversation with our interveners. And the way we maximize could be in a country, could be in a region, it can be in a specific industry or supply chain, whatever angle we take. At the end of the day, it's that capacity to ensure that the whole ecosystem is emulated and working together. We will explore all those aspects. And just very briefly, I will walk through the two levers that we are not going to discuss in detail for the time of the webinar today. The number one that I was talking about is the one that is coming with acceptability and consumer demand. I will just focus on the most recent changes that we have noticed ourselves through the recent ongoing pandemic. And where clearly we can see that there is a growing expectation from consumers to explore purpose and to match or make sure that their purchasing activities are increasingly aligned with some pressures coming from the kind of vulnerability they are suffering from with the pandemic, asking then for more local products or products that are more sustainable, sort of, or more reused. There are multiple components in the space. It's pretty complex, but at the end of the day, we can clearly see, according to a good number of studies, that there is a growing demand, which at the end of the day implies that for many apparel companies, it is increasingly important to serve a purpose and to increase the circularity component of what is brought to the consumer. Another aspect that we will not discuss much more in detail for the time of the webinar today is, of course, the growing regulatory pressure. In our experience, this pressure has been there and increasingly there for the past 40 years, 50 years. But clearly it has grown exponentially, asking for more recyclability in the past and tax incentives, notably, for example, in Europe, in Japan. But now moving to the next level where there clearly, for example, a growing ban on multiple disposable plastics that we can see in Europe. As just like a random example. So apparel companies are under very strong pressure, increasingly to have to be simply compliant in terms of the circularity of the fibers that they are purchasing and processing. Now let's move to much more of the conversation with the contribution of our first panelist, Sacha. And I will ask Sacha then to share what I think I would just frame that as a brief introductory word. I think to me, the core value is alignment. And of course, Sacha will certainly add to that and share a perspective. So Sacha, your turn.
Hi, Fareed. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here on this webinar and have an opportunity to speak to all of your network about what we're doing at Fashion Positive and how we are trying to drive more clarity and collaboration across the textile industry for circular fibers. So if you can go to the next slide. We are a group of brands, and we also have a group of innovators and other NGOs and like-minded organizations that we work with in order to drive the vision, definition, and implementation of safe and circular materials. Fashion Positive came out of the Cradle to Cradle Innovation Institute and has had a long history. We started actually in 2014 on these issues, working with within Cradle to Cradle, but also with brands looking to improve the inputs and circularity all the way down to the fiber development. And last year, we actually transitioned and became our own project and affiliated in partnership with Textile Exchange because of the very focused effort on fibers and materials in the textile industry and how we can work together in a broader network to not only look at how fibers are being developed and to advance circular fiber, but also in terms of how do we harness the work that's taking place across the industry beyond kind of certification, cradle to cradle certification in and of itself, but also harness all of the other things that are moving the industry towards systems change for circularity. So over this last year, we really were kind of in startup mode to redefine what this next era of circularity needs, given that we've had 5 years of learning. And first, these are our goals, 1, 2, 3. And these actually didn't change. It's just that now the system is moving quite quickly now that there's a lot more knowledge around circularity and there's a lot more levers that we can pull. So first, we are continuing to define and educate the industry on the term circular materials, which we'll talk about today. This is what we'll focus on today, are the guidelines that we released in Q3 last year. Secondly, enabling the development of more circular high volume materials and accelerating the use of those materials. So Fashion Positive really focuses not on niche materials or those that are really in early stage development, but rather those that have been tested, are part of already funding streams and are ready to take that next step into scalability. So the focus of 2 and 3 is really around those increasing the supply chain connections and also increasing the amount of investment going to actually scale these materials. So if we go to the next slide. What we worked on over the last really 2 years is bringing together a lot of the bodies within the industry that are either certifying or have some kind of standards around clean fiber development, and worked on how do we provide more clarity and guidance to the brands in particular and the innovators who are developing new materials around what would enable a clean supply chain throughout the whole cycle, so that when we do think about durability, when we do start to think about really at what point do we have end of life, and then what happens when we recycle it into the system, how do we know that we are engendering a process that is clean, safe for workers, and also will drive the systems change needed to keep those materials and the value in the system. And so you'll see that we worked with all of these bodies in order to develop these guidelines, and we released them in August, but really launched them in September. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what is covered in the guidelines. And I will provide a little bit of detail in later slides, but really I would just have you go to the website fashionpositive.org and download them. They're actually very simple. We purposely kept them simple with an idea that we are trying to really create the connection points for the system to start transitioning and really focus on continuous improvement. So really starting somewhere and harnessing some of the work that's already taken place to really get the systems in place. So there's actually 5 components, but we're done with 4 of them. And the 4 areas that we're focused on is, of course, feedstock. Where is the material coming from? And to harness more recycled material. So we partner, of course, still with Cradle to Cradle as well as Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and aligned these guidance to the vision and what Ellen MacArthur has put out, particularly in jeans redesign. And we differ in one way, which Ellen MacArthur Foundation and us kind of worked a long time on aligning, and that is Fashion Positives really trying to kind of cut into the mountain the ability for more recycled product to get into the system and to start churning this wheel. So the one area that we focus on is that the guideline really does push for including recycled content, whereas Ellen MacArthur Foundation does allow for 100% organic to still be considered circular. We differ in just that one area because we're very focused on trying to cut into the system this ability to really cycle through. So we have feedstock, we discuss the chemistry, the water, and we'll get into these a little bit deeper, and then energy and really renewable energy. So if we go to the next slide.
Yes, and just a quick question coming my way. Any fiber that you had top of mind as you were working on the development of those guidelines, just to be concrete with an example?
Yes, that is a great question. So currently, the theory of change when the group first started to work on this, the group of brands, as well as Cradle to Cradle and all the other organizations, was that we were focusing on the cellulosic and protein fibers. And the idea was that we would work on a single fiber definition in order to try to drive more singular fibers so that there wasn't mixing of fibers, and that we can start to signal to the industry that we need to start thinking long-term about how we will disassemble and then be able to recycle back into the system these materials. Since this guideline has been developed, there's 2 things. One is that we were asked by Ellen MacArthur Foundation to start with some, if we could take up the fabric level guidelines. And through that discussion, what has come out, and because the industry is moving so quickly, is that we no longer can just try to push for single fiber definitions. In order to get to the fabric level, we're going to have to deal with the fact that 1, there's other materials that go into fabric development, but then 2, there's more and more innovation taking place that are mixing different kinds of recycled inputs. So for instance, a man-made cellulosic or a recycled cotton being mixed with a fiber that comes from recycled plastics in order to be combined into a yarn. So we're going to now take on this year, what does circular synthetics look like? This guideline that we're talking through right now is specifically focused on protein and cellulosic fibers. So cotton, hemp, as well as the man-made cellulosic. So anything coming from wood pulp and other sources. So that's the feedstock we're talking about in this particular guidance is the natural materials, and how we start to use these natural materials in the system and clean the system itself, as well as how we get recycled fibers back into the system. So great question. So that's the first feedstock. Chemistry, we of course partner with CDHC and defined 3 requirements around the input chemistry. And this is where we're focused also on, within this particular guidance, on non-petroleum feedstock. So synthetic alternatives, again, we haven't dealt with at this guidance, and we should be coming out with new guidance at the end of this year. And we are currently looking for brands and other innovators and any other organizations focused on that to partner with us. We're just about to launch that work. We haven't yet. We'll probably launch it in the next month. So I invite people to get in touch with me who are interested in petroleum-based synthetics to get in touch. Third is water. We talk about water stewardship, and there's three components to that, of course: the quality, how we clean and keep the water recycled and in use, and then also use less. And then finally, working on energy and how to usher in more renewable energy within the system throughout the production. So that's what the guidelines cover. I think there's one more slide perhaps, which is really focused on what I spoke about in the front of the presentation.
No, we don't.
Oh, great. Okay. Really what that was focused on was what I was talking about on continuous improvement, and that what we've found in our learning is really around trying to define and provide clarity for the industry on what is credible and legitimate circular fiber, so that the whole of the system is clean and that we get the system up and running. And that means an immense amount of collaboration, even more. I mean, this industry more than others has been more collaborative and has learned how to work together in a different way than in many other industries. But that the level of collaboration to make this kind of systems change is critical and intense. And there needs an unprecedented amount of funding to make it happen, not only to develop clean and circular fibers and materials, but to make all the connections throughout the supply chain is going to take a lot of investment and a little bit of offloading some of the risk between the different systems, because there's a lot that we have to do to make it happen. So thank you. Thank you so much, Farid.
Yeah, excellent. We'll come back with additional questions. No worries. And moving to also the presentation of Carla, just keeping a thread in the conversation. So we've covered a great initiative building more alignment to scale up circularity. And that's really critical in the space, given especially the kind of technical complexity we are addressing here. And now we are moving to another angle of the equation that is extremely important: resources, finance. So Carla, welcome, and really delighted to have you as part of this conversation, sharing your very interesting perspective.
Thank you, Farid. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciated, Sacha, your speech. I always love listening to what the work you're all doing, so it's my pleasure. Great to be here.
Tell us more about Alante Capital and how you are addressing, exploring the investment in circularity.
Sure, absolutely. So my name's Carla Mora. I'm the founder and managing partner of Alante Capital. I started this company about 4 years ago with my business partner, Leslie Harwell, really to help to influence a systemic change within the apparel industry, not looking at investing in the next brand, the next sustainable brand, but really what are the tools required in the back end that can enable all the brands and the suppliers and actors across the supply chain to really produce in a more responsible way that is at the intersection of both sustainability and profitability. So you can go to the next slide. I can speak from there. So really at Alante Capital, we invest in innovative technologies that can enable a resilient and sustainable future for apparel production and retail. Coming into this, we were really interested in looking how climate change and other big macro global economic changes would affect industries. And as I was doing due diligence at another fund I was at on an innovation in apparel, I came to see that there was huge opportunity in the apparel industry due to the kind of input constraints that were happening and were going to only increase as our climate continued to change, not knowing that a few years down the road we would be in a global pandemic and it would only show even more the need for the kinds of tools that would enable more nimble production, a more emphasis on your digital channels to figure out how to decrease on waste there, looking at diverse inputs, et cetera. So we'll dive into the types of companies that we invest in, but really just from a higher level understanding, this is why we got started. We really thought, okay, as consumers, we love sustainable fashion, but it's a lot to ask the industry to be better and be sustainable and do it right if they don't have the tools to do that. This industry has been around for a long time, and it's going to take some time to be able to really transform. So that's where we come in. We're here just as an enabler to help the new startups and innovators meet the brands and retailers that they need to be able to go to market and scale their technologies. And we come in with both advisory work, connections to brands, as well as the early stage capital. So we invest across a variety of technologies and business models, which we'll go into more on the next slide, but high level, it's new materials. Oh, you can go back. New materials, consumer and enterprise software, clean technologies, et cetera. And that allows us to build a risk-adjusted portfolio that can be within the confines of a venture capital fund. So we have a 10-year fund, that we're in the start of our second year. We, are expecting to have exits from our technologies within 5 to 7 years of each investment at a multiple that makes sense for a VC fund. So within those confines, we're obviously limited in the types of projects that we can invest in, but that was very intentional on my behalf when we were starting this out. We really believed that we could find and identify technology that could be scalable enough and compete on whether it's cost or quality or both, a way that could actually replace the incumbent technology and just be the way that business is done. And so having that kind of larger scale requirement in the types of companies we're investing in enabled us to build a venture capital backed pipeline. So that's one side of what we're doing. And the other side of the information on this slide talks a little bit about how we're making sure that those companies are truly viable and solving real problems for the industry identified by the industry. So as kind of finance professional outsiders coming into this space, both my partner and I have backgrounds in supply chain reform, agriculture, a little bit in apparel, but really we are outsiders, and we came in asking questions. What is it that you need to be able to produce more responsibly? What kind of technologies would help you meet those sustainability goals for 2030? So early on, before we had a fund, we started partnerships with major apparel companies. Levi's Strauss was the first. We also work with Gap Inc., VF Corporation, Kering Group, many large brands to help to understand what are their challenges and what is their eagerness, aptitude, and ability to work with innovation to address some of those challenges. And from them, we learn, do the innovations that we see compete on quality, cost? Do they improve operational efficiency or enhance the customer experience? Really what we're looking for is, can this technology truly be viable? Can it be scalable? And most importantly, can it replace its negative incumbent technology? And it doesn't have to compete on cost from day one, but we expect that it will be able to within a timeline that makes sense for us. So it's usually about 3 to 4 years within its product category. We also really look to see, does it integrate seamlessly into a company's operations or the supply chain? So with our type of capital as a micro VC fund, we're really looking for technologies that kind of innovate on the input side and then can just drop into the supply chain. And I'll get some examples going there, but not something that will be grown in a lab and have to stay in a lab as it scales, as that requires far more capital than something that we could participate in. And we are also looking at what tools are available now, because we're helping to kind of really push the apparel industry to take steps now to integrate these innovations. And so those that can actually drop into the supply chain that exists are able to do that. And then we also learn from our brand partners, what are the priorities in the near term, as well as, in years out. When we got started, we were really looking across a variety of innovations. Dye and new materials were two of them. And as we kind of dove in with our brand partners, we realized quickly that they were ready to work with new innovative materials and interested in dyes, but not quite ready to start working with them. This was a few years ago. Now we see more of them excited about looking at innovation on the dye space. So we take those priorities into account. And then we facilitate engagement between the brands and the startups. So we make those introductions. We help the startups navigate the apparel industry, which can be huge and complex and confusing with, different brands having different exclusivity expectations. We really kind of help our startups navigate that and find multiple partners that they can go to market with, so that we can help them decrease the risk and the costs. And then we help them with scale assistance to identify a tiered engagement plan for market-ready innovations. So with brands, and we do this in a more in-depth way now than when we started, but we help them actually drive these technologies to market. And with the technologies, we help bring in outside capital. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is a little map that we find handy that kind of tracks the types of innovations that we track. And, this kind of evolves as the industry evolves, but it's primarily, we take a circular approach to the industry. So what you'll see here is both the supply chain, but also looking at when the technology or the product reaches the customer, and then ultimately, how is it recovered? How is it recycled and brought right back into production? So how we really break it down, we look at raw materials, dyes, processing and finishing chemistries. We look at innovation in cut and sew. How can we design for zero waste? How can we right-size production? We look at inventory management. How can we be making the right size product for the customers that we have? How can we look at shipping and packaging and start to decrease our negative footprints there with more innovative or more efficient systems? We look at recycled packaging solutions. We look at fit technology here right now. That's really important, as every brand is now forced to engage more with their e-commerce channel more than ever. We're really looking at what are the tools that can help them convert browsers to buy, but then also enable those buyers to keep the products that they're selling and not return them. So we look at fit technology. We look at supply chain logistics and transparency technologies. On the sale and retail side, we're really excited about some circular business models, looking at rental and resale. And then ultimately on the recycling side, we're excited about both the platforms that help companies access dead stock material or resale on products or materials before they've been made into products, but then also in the chemical recycling technologies that will be required to really enable circularity. So this pipeline has enabled us to build a database of over 200 early stage companies that fit within this thesis. And as you see, none of these are brands, but really the technologies and products that brands would require to be able to produce in a more responsible way, as well as the tools that consumers require to be able to find these types of new sustainable materials and brands. So I can speak to a couple examples here. On the raw material side, Mango Materials, that was our very first investment. We did that late 2019. We invested in their Series A round alongside two major apparel companies and a number of other outside investors. I'm on the board there. We're very excited about them. Mango Materials produces a biodegradable polyester fiber alternative made from waste methane-based PHA. It's for us, it's a key new fiber that's going to really enable us to, as an industry, address our microfiber pollution issue, but also look at how the synthetic side of blended materials that Sacha was talking about can be either recycled or biodegrade. So this is an exciting technology. We've helped them grow in the early years to build their initial plant so that they are able to produce enough to be able to go to market with a couple of brands, which will unlock a great deal of additional capital to begin to scale later this year, early next year. So we can speak to that maybe in the questions, or if I get time to kind of how we help drive additional capital in. But that's an example of the company we've invested in already. Circ, down on the circular recovery side, is another. That's a chemical recycling company that recycles down blended garment waste and recovers both the polyester monomers and uses them to be able to make a new recycled poly, but from old clothes as opposed to plastic bottles. And the cotton becomes the pulp that goes into man-made cellulosic fiber production. They have a clean closed loop system that we're really excited about. Worn-Again Technologies is another technology that does something similar that's based in Europe. We're very excited about them too. That's in the garment recycling space. There's a number of these that are starting to come out. We're thrilled about that. We have so much waste that needs to be feedstock that we're really happy to see that this is starting to get addressed in a feasible way. And then our third investment that we've made so far is in Lizzie over on the sales and retail side. And that is a back-end software and logistics platform that enables rental for brands and retailers. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I already spoke to this a bit, but our approach is really to partner with the industry to ensure that we are investing in the tools, kind of the best in class technologies across each category, in ones that can truly be viable and scalable, solving their problems. So we look, can it be cost competitive, or does it provide new revenue streams? Rental and resale are exciting for brands as it can help to open up their products to new markets, to younger consumers often, and create additional revenue streams. Also helps become an avenue for unsold inventory, and allows them to kind of stay with ownership over the rental and resale space, which has so far not happened, as those two areas have boomed in the market. As I guess now's a good time to say, so we think about sustainability and circularity slightly differently than others. We're not looking just at sustainable fibers. That's where it started. That's where my passion really began within the apparel industry. But we look at it more holistically to say, yes, once we make this sustainable product with the best fiber, with the best finishing chemistries and best dye, how can we make the right amount? And how can we get it to be worn as many times as possible and not die in the back of your closet or just be worn once? Take a more holistic approach to sustainability and circularity, enabling us to help provide our brand and industry partners with a broader kind of portfolio of tools that can help them address sustainability. And some of them enable them to actually get additional revenue right away, which helps them be able to get approvals through their various departments and actually get going on moving forward towards sustainability goals. So let's go to the last slide and then make sure there's room for questions.
Yes, and we'll
Yeah.
have also some time for to Maya and group discussion, and a lot of questions coming as well.
Okay, great. So this is really just kind of a symbolic slide. This actually gets evolved constantly as there are more exits, more IPOs in the space. But what we're showing here is really that what we're looking at, these types of investments, even though they can massively increase the sustainability of the apparel industry and enable circularity, these are great business opportunities, and they have real exciting exit opportunities for investors that come in early. And so with our very specific level of expertise and our advisory board of apparel industry experts, we're able to help bring in outside capital that might not completely understand the opportunities in apparel. We help to drive them in by sharing our due diligence and our network. So this all to say is kind of where we stand in the finance space. Is while we are impact investors, we are very much also venture capitalists that expect really truly scalable technologies with good returns. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions for me.
Well, transitioning to Sadumaya, question would be to explore how you are working on life cycle analysis or assessment to ensure that what you want to promote and substitute is overall for the better. I know you kind of back that.
Absolutely, that's really important. And when we were looking into mango materials and looking at PHA-based fiber, synthetic fiber alternatives, we were looking at kind of life cycle assessments on sugar and corn-based PHA versus waste methane-based PHA. And the LCA, if it's using sugar and cotton or corn, it's so much worse. It performs so much worse that it's hard for a brand to incentivize their across departments to actually take the investment risk of moving into a different fiber that performs so much worse than regular polyester. Whereas waste methane-based PHA it can actually be carbon negative depending on where you're shipping from, and often carbon neutral. So we lean on our apparel company partners and experts that are on our advisory board, looking at different LCAs. We receive the LCAs from our apparel company, or from the innovators. They have to get external parties that do them for them, and so we're able to kind of look at that. We invest also alongside a variety of brands, including Patagonia and Adidas, who also go into depth about that side of it, that make that the LCA and the sustainability side is truly going to actually be beneficial, and that we're not going to see some sort of negative externality a few years down the line when the technology is wildly successful.
Brilliant. Need to move and ensure that Satumaya can also share a perspective. Thanks so much, Carla. We'll come back with a few group discussions and questions. Satumaya, welcome. As I mentioned earlier, to maintain a thread in our discussions, one of the key levers to increase circularity is clearly this capacity to create a kind of market platform, and in that sense connect offer, demand, and ensure that there is an ecosystem that can be built. Welcome, and share your perspective of you operating with the Finnish industry. And I must say that myself, I worked a lot with Finnish companies, and I think very highly of the work and the initiatives coming from Finland. So we're really delighted to have you with us.
Thank you, Farid. I'm really excited to join today. So my name is Satu Maijamäki, and I work as a Chief Advisor of Sustainability and Circular Economy in Finnish Textile and Fashion Association. And I will start by telling you a few words about our organization and our work on the circular economy of textiles. So our organization is 150 years old, central organization for textile, clothing, and fashion companies in Finland. We have almost 200 member companies, and these members produce, for example, clothing, home textiles, sportswear, and outdoor apparel. But as we all know, the textile sector is much wider than only clothing and apparel. So our members also produce industrial nonwovens as well as technical textiles. And we are industry association. So our goal is to ensure that our member companies have a beneficial business environment, and the circular economy has been one of our focus areas. And systemic change is something that we cannot avoid, and we see that the Finnish companies have a lot to give in this sector. And so I'm really happy that I have an opportunity to present some of these solutions for you today. So you can move on the next slide, please. Finland is a small country in the Northern Europe, and we have a long history of forest industry and development of a different kind of bio-based products. And also Finnish textile sector has done for a long time a high quality research and development for new ecological textile fibers and recycling solutions. But I don't want to focus only on the recycled materials, because we need a systemic change for the current system. And a few years ago, we stopped to think why these solutions, what we have, they are not available yet, and is there something that is missing? And we gathered all the researchers and key players from circular value chains together and started to build a national ecosystem around the circular textiles. And we call it Telaketju, and it's the name of the Finnish circular textile ecosystem, and it comes from the Finnish words textile recycling, sorting, and utilizing network. And this network includes all the researchers, textile companies, end-of-life textile collector, municipal waste management, sorters, charity organizations, and also the companies who can process textile waste for a new commercial use. And what I see very special in this Finnish ecosystem is the openness. We have managed to bring all the key actors from the circular value chain together and share they share all the knowledge that they have. And we know that the separate textile collection will become mandatory in EU by 2025. And in Finland, it will start already 2 years earlier. But that's not a challenge, because we already have this ecosystem and the process ready for the circularity. And actually, this is something that offers Finnish companies a lot of opportunities to build a new collaborations by sharing this knowledge that we have and offering the circular solutions to others. And there's a link where you can find more information about this ecosystem. So you can move on the next slide, please. Here you can see 3 concrete solutions from Finnish companies, and these are not the only ones, but why I picked these is because these are already or almost on the commercially available. So first, I would like to present the Infinity Fiber, who is the company. They have developed a technology that can turn post-consumer textile waste into a new circular textile fiber. They have focused on the cotton-rich textile waste, but the technology is flexible also on the wide range of other cellulose materials. And what is special in their technique, all the non-cellulosic particles are cleaned out in their process, so they can handle also example mixed materials that include polyester or elastane. And also the dyes are cleaned out. And their technology is ready and proven, so it gives viscose factories the sustainable alternative and the possibility to change for a new, more sustainable fiber and a safer process by getting rid of the carbon disulfide. And what's also unique in their technology is that the fibers can be recycled in the same process again after the use, and the new recycled fibers are just as good as the original. So more information about the technology and its availability you can find straight from their website. And then other example is Spinnova. They are also offering a new sustainable material alternative for textile industry, but their material is made of wood, and idea comes straight from the nature, and the technology is imitating spiders' way to produce their web, and with similar technologies, Spinnova produces textile fibers from wood-based materials mechanically without using any harmful chemicals. And they have focused to use pulp, but the technology can be used almost any other cellulosic biomass as well. And also their fiber can be upcycled in their process again after the use without losing the quality properties. And also from their solution, you can read more about the technology and their collaborations from their websites. And the third example, which I picked up, is the pure waste. And they manufacture and sell yarns, fabrics, and garments made from 100% recycled materials. And this may sound a more common solution, but because their operation is based on the collecting and the recycling cutting waste from textile industry. But what's unique is that their products are made of 100% recycled fibers, meaning that not any virgin materials or dyeing needs to be used. So they sort all the materials by quality and the color. And so the color of the waste defines the color of the new final product. And the batches are mechanically opened into fibers and mixed with chemically recycled polyester. And then the fibers are spun into yarns like in any other spinning processes. And I think that was my brief presentation. Where does the Finnish textile sector stand right now on circularity?
Thank you. No, that's very, very, very important and great input that shows. And I will connect then to make sure that we stick to as much as possible to the time that we have to kind of a brief group discussion with one question I would like to ask to each of our interveners today. But just before I do that, just two brief practical elements coming my way in terms of question. One, of course, all the content here will be shared afterward by email and accessible on the website. The question has come many times. Second, there is a poll that is in the way. Please respond. I can see that more or less half of the people here have responded right now. So make sure to respond to the 3 questions for the remaining question, the time that we have. It's very helpful. And thanks so much, because the satisfaction seems to be pretty high, and that's good for the team working on that. Brief question for our panelists. I would just get back to Sacha with one question at the end of the day, exploring a lot of what's coming my way. Question number 1, choose your battles. So now that the guideline is developed, what would be the priority areas where you would love and you believe that the guideline has high potential for transformational change, I would say, in some of the fibers? What would be the priorities? That would be a question for you. And of course, other interveners can also intervene if they have a different opinion or they want to add to that.
Thank you, Farid. I think it's a great question, because it does. I love your number 1 on choose your battles, because it's very hard for us to stick to just one thing like the guidelines, because there's so much to do. So for us, one is to obviously get more of the community and the industry to know the guidelines and give us feedback and take them up. We've gotten an amazing amount of positive feedback, as well as how do we work on these to make them even more relevant for more fiber areas. Hold on. I'm so sorry. One, take them up, tell us how difficult, how easy it is to enable them, because they will be improved year on year. Then it's increasing the take up of these new fibers into the supply chain. That's our next big focus area. And we're actively now engaging in not only funding, but those partners in the chain to take up innovative fibers, for instance, that Carla is investing in, and others, to be able to be scalable within the existing system and to start turning the system into a circular one.
Just curious if, from your perspective, Carla, you would agree, or you would think that you would have a different perspective on the priority fibers that could make sense. And I would connect that to the other question for you also on invest in innovative model. What would be your one piece of advice, I would say, for investors interested in this space where there really is an interesting potential, and to be respectful of there would be a space that potentially is either of interest for you or not, by the way, a space you think is promising, but not a space you really want to address yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas that are exciting to us, and for us as a fund managers, it's important we take a diversified approach to fund creation. So we can't be only investing in new materials or only in digital solutions. It's really that balance that we need as fund managers, but also that I believe that the apparel companies need to be able to take steps forward in whichever capacity the companies are ready to go. So not everyone's able to fund R&D for new materials, but some can, use a digital solution. So we like to provide options across the board. I'm really personally excited about areas to decrease dependence on synthetic fiber. So looking at kind of natural inputs to fibers that can be high performing yet biodegrade. We're looking at some natural fibers that are able to be kind of compounded through chemistry to act like a more of a synthetic fiber, but still be a natural. That's an area that I personally have interest in. I'm also really excited about dyes and trying to address the environmental challenges in that space. That's just from my personal, and recycling is also very exciting. I'm very happy with the company that we did invest in, but we're looking at more of the ecosystem. How are we going to manage sorting and collection beyond just recycling? And so that's an area that I'm also excited about.
Excellent. And just Carla, as you're there, and other interveners will share their perspectives as well. Point number 3, boost collaborations. Actually, I would change a little bit the angle that we had initially to address some questions about the balance between kind of what is driven by LCA and good understanding of the environmental analysis, but to expand that to the human right considerations. There are questions coming in that space to ensure that there is, or it's work in progress, I don't know, it's really an open question. Some consideration in that space. And maybe actually, Satumaya, that can potentially be a question you might address, given that you haven't shared perspective so far, or you kind of try to take that into account, and that can be interesting to get Sacha's and Carla's perspective on that as well, if they want.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I maybe missed the question. Can you repeat it?
For human rights, and for example, working conditions and child labor and those kind of conditions, investing on ensuring that we promote the right circular solutions. And
oh, this is such a huge area, and I think we should always consider both the environmental and the social part of the sustainability. And I don't see that these are that it's what is the challenge for that. Maybe others can help because
Sure. I'd be happy to speak to that. This is Carla. Yeah, so that's something that we thought a lot about starting out, and we thought, okay, do we just work on supporting small emerging sustainable brands that and are addressing all those areas? Or do we work with kind of the leaders in the space that have been around a long time and do a lot of things wrong? And for me, that was what I wanted to focus on, because we needed to really provide the tools to get them to start doing things right. And so for us, including the human rights abuses, that's not something we go and talk to them about, but it is something that we expect they continue to get out, and it puts pressure on them to do things better. And that helps to create an even greater market for these new innovations, these new materials. If you're talking about materials in India, I see in the comments that are already done right, but from smaller producers, we're excited about platforms that help provide them market access. And so there are innovations we look for that are helping brands to find these kind of smaller, more nimble producers around the world and be able to access those products that they have. So I think really it's not, for us, it's like we want to be able to support the companies to take to be better, because that's how we see change happen, as opposed to kind of shutting them out from the process of progress. So yeah, I'll stop there. Maybe follow-up questions.
And I can just speak to the guidelines. So I had alluded to the fact that there is a fifth pillar actually of the guidance. And one of the things that we couldn't do within the time frame was deal with the social fairness pillar, which was what is the fifth pillar, because we needed a completely different set of stakeholders to feed into that. And particularly, it's difficult at the part of the supply chain we're focused on, which is that innovative materials. And so how do we understand not only what's required for those, that particular level. So what do we need to have the innovators actually show whether they're abiding by social fairness principles, whether you're taking, you know, whichever kind of code of conduct you want. But then how do we understand the UN guiding principles on business and human rights to account for either down to the raw materials and regenerative farming, and how do we assess that, since that's since we're using existing standards and auditors, evaluators, how do we leverage what's taking place there? But then also, once we do get into yarn and mill manufacturers, how do we account for that? So there is a way for us to build our leverage into the guidelines around social fairness. And that's also something that we've committed to releasing this year.
Thank you so much. We must really stick to the format as much as possible. It's a 1-hour podcast. Normally, the conversation is very dense. I just want to thank you all for your contributions. And just moving to our practical next steps. Thanks for contributing to the poll for many of you. All this content will be uploaded. Upcoming similar webinars displayed on the screen right now. And actually, it connects with kind of those closing points on traceability and capacity building solutions that can be part of a next webinar scheduled in March. And then later on the human rights legally binding instruments to date. So it's interesting, but what's it's coming for the upcoming months. If you want to stay tuned with our webinars. It's a pleasure to have welcomed you all in this discussion today. And if we had been able to be in a room all together, that would have been a pleasure to close this very interesting discussion with more of a drink or something. But the pleasure of the webinars is also to enable each of you to close the webinar now, share with colleagues, and hopefully I've found that inspiring to make sure that you can apply what you've learned here. And I need to thank you all for your contribution. Thank you so much, Sacha, Carla, Satumaya.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.